Happy New Year, Ambius, and welcome to the January Connection. We'll start with safety. The topic this month is water bottles. A plastic water bottle filled with water is an important key to keeping you hydrated. Hydration is a critical component of your health, well-being, and safety. During your workday, a water bottle should be used for hydration only. It is an Ambius company policy that a water bottle is not to be used to store fertilizer or any other chemical. Chemicals can never be placed in any container that resembles a food or beverage. The original container for this fertilizer does not look appetizing, yummy, or delicious. All secondary containers for chemicals should be the same, unappetizing. An Ambius colleague recently had an accident that demonstrates the importance of this policy. A colleague was concerned about working efficiently and effectively in several different customer accounts. She found it difficult to pour from the company-provided container and ended up wasting fertilizer. Because it was easier and did not waste fertilizer, she decided to use a water bottle as her secondary container for fertilizer. Recently, while distracted and thirsty, she took a gulp from the water bottle filled with fertilizer instead of her similar bottle filled with water. She was alarmed by the taste and the burning sensation in her throat. Our colleague drove herself to the hospital and was in the emergency room for treatment and observation for several hours. Part of the observation was having her blood pressure monitored, and she had an IV hooked up in case poison control measures were needed. Fertilizer is a chemical, and it is not for human consumption. Ammonium nitrate, calcium nitrate, potassium nitrate, cobalt sulfate, monoammonium phosphate are just a few of the ingredients included in our Foliage Pro fertilizer. Imagine having those ingredients sloshing around in your belly. Luckily, she was not severely injured, but the situation certainly could have been much more serious. The whole situation could have been avoided had she discussed her challenge with her manager instead of developing a solution on her own. Using an appropriate chemical storage bottle would have made a huge difference in the situation. An appropriate chemical container doesn't feel like a water bottle, and so you wouldn't drink from it. Please talk to your manager soon about the options if you have a potentially hazardous situation because of a container you are currently using. Proper chemical containers will help reduce the risk of injury to yourself and to others. It is unsafe and unprofessional for you to store any chemical in any kind of bottle or container that resembles a food or beverage. This presentation shows you several container options for fertilizers or other chemicals. It doesn't mean you have to have this one. There are other varieties and sizes that are available and are approved as long as they don't look like a food or beverage container. Thank you for your attention today.
Hi Ambius, it's January 2023. We got a request from one of our frontline colleagues to have a video made on pruning pothos in a green wall. And fortunately, we have a green wall that has nothing but pothos in it, and we've got some long vines on these as well. So what we're gonna do in this connection is take a look at the pothos plant, specifically in green walls, and talk about their growth habit, their vines, and some of the advantages and disadvantages of letting the vines grow, and hoping that you can make the best decision as to how you should prune pothos in your green walls. A lot of times it's very tempting to let a green wall of pothos grow out, let the vines grow out. And early on, that actually will be less maintenance, typically, because you don't have to really do any pruning. And over time, it looks good. It actually looks really good when you let the vines grow out, especially pothos where they can trail, like in a green wall. Where it does become an issue is eventually if you do have to go in and prune those pothos, if they're overgrown vines. If you have to prune those, the look is going to look so bizarre to the customer that they are going to be very disappointed. And really, a lot of times your only option at that point is to simply replace all of those pothos, which can cost a lot of money. Your other option is to try to stay ahead of it, where you let the vines kind of grow, but you go in and do thinning and heading cuts so that you kind of maintain it, and you're not really doing it to make the wall look better, but you're doing it to get the plants to last longer so they don't get too overgrown to a point where now you can't do anything but replace the plants. So what we're going to try to do is show you how to kind of let your vines grow a bit, but also keep them in check so that ultimately these plants will last many years instead of just 1 or 2 years. As we begin to talk about pothos, we'll talk a little bit about the plant itself and its behavior, especially indoors. So we got a long vine here, and the pothos vine is interesting the way this plant grows in the wild. So they will continue to grow even indoors, which is unlike a lot of plants that we have indoors. Sometimes plants will stretch indoors, but a lot of times they won't put on a whole lot of growth. But I'd like to talk about why pothos do this. You can see we have a long vine here that's a couple feet long. And in the wild, what pothos do is they grow in jungly environments, and sometimes they will actually grow vines downwards, but a lot of times they will actually grow vines and they'll grow up and climb a tree. And as they're climbing that tree, you'll notice that they have these, everywhere there's a leaf, you'll actually see these small little roots. And those little roots will serve a couple purposes. It'll actually help attach it to the tree so it'll stay anchored to the tree. So the tree itself is what it's anchored to. And these roots, as they form, like any root, can also absorb water and nutrients. And on top of all of that, as these vines grow in the wild, they could get very long. And if they become separated somehow for whatever reason, then a new plant can start to grow from one of these nodes. And so that's part of the reason why they grow like this. Pothos do not really produce from seed at all. You rarely, if ever, will see a pothos flower, but they will reproduce this way in the wild. So what we've got here is a stem, and we have leaves forming off of the stem. And when you have a leaf, this is considered a true leaf right here. And what that means is you have a leaf actually growing off of the stem of the plant. Anytime that's the case with any plant, that also means that inside here somewhere there's a bud. And if you cut this stem, if we do a heading cut, for example, if I cut right here, then this vine is not going to die back from this point. This will be perfectly fine. It might start, the bud that's down in there might start growing. It's totally safe to make a cut like that on a pothos plant. So here we've got a pothos vine that a cut was made. This is a heading cut made probably a month ago. And you can see where this cut was made. And the bud right underneath it at this true leaf, that bud actually did start to grow a new vine. And this type of cut will make your pothos more compact, more bushy and more compact. So if they're getting too long and too viney, you can keep them more condensed this way. One of the things that's a little strange about pruning plants indoors is you don't always know if the buds down there are actually gonna start to grow or not. Sometimes you make a cut and nothing happens. And there's really nothing wrong with that per se, but you might wonder, why is it that this pothos started growing new shoots? You can see here we have one shoot and then we have another one behind that. The main reason why they will start to grow new growth is that the plants are healthy. They have plenty of light, they have plenty of food, and that food has to go somewhere, and so the new growth is where that is going to start to go. If, on the other hand, the plant is in really low light and it's struggling, it may not put out any new growth because it doesn't have enough food, or it might only put out just a tiny amount. So sometimes you will get growth, sometimes you won't. Well, now let's think about the pros and the cons of having these long vines. Typically the customer wants the long vines, and that's because a lot of times they're seeing it from a distance. And the vines do look really good from a distance. It's when you come up closer that you start to notice some of the issues with having long vines. So if we come in here as an example, we got these vines cascading down. And as they do that, anything that's underneath here is getting shaded out. And so some plants actually won't even really grow that much because they're being shaded out. So these plants would do better if the vines above were not shading them out. That's one disadvantage. Another disadvantage to these long vines is you will get more yellows because you have more leaves. And the yellows tend to happen on the oldest leaf of the plant. So what might happen over time is you get really good growth at the ends of the vines, and then when you take this off someday, you're kind of left with a few older leaves and sometimes really not much of any leaf up above. Sometimes the vines will be just vines and really no leaves, and that's not attractive. As an example here, where I see this yellow leaf, let's take a look and see where that is. Okay, so I pull this out. You can see these vines are starting to really get tangled up. But this yellow leaf is closer to the back here. It isn't the oldest leaf, but it's one of the older leaves. And by the time we take this one out, if I was to cut this, and then we take this whole vine out. I'm going to fast forward through this section because I'll end up spending a lot of time trying to find this vine. And that's one of the things I want to emphasize with long vines is that this can take a lot of your time. So letting vines grow out like this can be very time consuming and should definitely be considered. Okay, so this is what I just took out. Now this brings up another point with long vines. Part of the issue of having long vines is this is more work for you because you have more responsibility. Imagine how much water this long vine is going to use. Every leaf needs water, so its water demands are going to be higher. And also, since you have so many leaves here, the chances of getting yellows is a lot higher. So think about that in terms of getting a callback from the customer because of yellow vines, or the plant's wilting because it doesn't have enough water. So think about it in terms of what that's going to mean for you if you have long vines like this. Typically it's going to mean more work, more maintenance, more time, more effort on your end when you have this. As far as the customer goes, I think the biggest downside for them to having long vines is you might come in and remove some of those vines and they may not like the look after the fact. There might be some shock involved. So what we're going to show you today is how can you start pruning something like this without the customer coming in and saying, whoa, you've taken out too much right there. Because if we did head all of these back, it would not look good. The plants would be fine with it, but the look would be terrible. All right, so as we prune these, we're thinking about two things. We're thinking about the health of the plant, and we're thinking about the aesthetics. So we could come in here and prune these back real heavily, but this is at a customer site, so we want to make sure that whatever we do, we don't see a lot of the black tray back there. That's not supposed to really be visible. So as we start making cuts, we want to use our best judgment to leave enough in here where it looks good, but we've taken some of these long vines out this visit, and maybe the next visit we might take a few more out, and then the next visit a few more. We're slowly kind of thinning it out over time, just so this doesn't get too overgrown. So right in here, I'm not really gonna prune much, because if I start taking out too much in here, you're gonna be able to see the trays. So this is not gonna be an area I'm gonna do a lot of pruning in. That's different than over on the end over here, where there's a lot, and I can afford to take a few of these out. And also, I can cut wherever I want. You know, one of the nice things about pothos is there's many places you can make a cut. So here, you know, some of these we also want to consider, they get too long, they get on the floor, you know, we'll start stepping on them and stuff. But, you know, it's really up to you where you prune these back. Here you can see some of those roots we were talking about earlier. Sometimes people wonder about these, you know, do you need to take them off? It's totally up to you. I mean, if you don't like the looks of them, you can completely cut these out if you want, but these are not harmful to the plant. If the customer doesn't like them, go ahead and take them out, but there's no harm done with those. But you can really prune anywhere. So let's take this one vine as an example and see where we could head this back. I don't think I like this. This is mostly just stem right here. So I'm going to take this one up higher, and I'm going to go, I'm noticing that really this is all just stem up here. I don't want any of that. That's just a long vine. Customer's not interested in that. So this is an easy one that I'm just going to cut all the way back to the base of the plant like that. This is what I took out right there. What the customer really wants to see is leaves. They're not really wanting to see the stems of the plant. All right, let's see what else we have here. So again, we got a lot going on here. So if I'm gonna start taking some stuff out, this would be the place to be. I'm gonna try to find stuff that doesn't look as good. So plants, vines that don't have many leaves, that maybe don't look as good. This one, it's okay down below, but you can see a lot of these leaves up here are gone. And it's mostly just vines, so it's kind of the same as the last one. I'll just cut that all the way back to the base like that. And every time I do that, it's giving some of these other leaves a chance to grow a little bit more. So let's see what else we got in here. Underneath is where you get a lot of stuff that doesn't really have a lot in terms of leaves. So something like this. There are leaves up on the top. So if you wanted to, you could leave this if you wanted to, and you could just cut back, let's say maybe to this leaf right here. Just head it back right there, like that. Okay. And now what we're leaving behind is a shorter stem with some leaves on it. Okay, going down here a little bit further, let's see where there's just too much. You can see that this one was headed back probably a month ago, and you can see a new shoot growing there. You can keep that on if for some reason you don't want it to grow like that. You can always take that off too. Pothos is a really good plant to head back. You have lots of different opportunities here. Let's see what else we got. So if I take this out here, let's see what's left behind. It would give that stuff a better opportunity to grow. I get more airflow and light in here. So this one, I think I will take it back to I think I'm going to take this whole shoot out right here, because I'm going to take that one back like that, and that'll open this up, and now you're able to groom in here better and get rid of some of the brown leaves. that are in here. I want to be careful not to remove too much because I'm starting to see the trays right here. So I don't want to take anything else out right there. And then here I've got, I think, just a few too many vines right here. So this one, take the lesser of the two. This one's only got a few leaves at the very bottom, whereas this one has leaves, it looks like all the way down. So I'm going to leave this vine, I'm going to keep because it's got more leaves. This one doesn't. So I'm going to take the lesser of the two, the one that is not as good. And this one too, I'm going to take it all the way back to the bottom because there's no leaves back here. I don't want to just leave. What I don't want to do is just leave, you know, just a stem behind like that. That's not going to do any good. Okay, something like this I certainly want to leave because if I take this out, I'm starting to see the trays again. I'm able to get in there more easily and take out some of the bad leaves. That'll help with airflow, and that'll help allow some light to get in so that these plants can maybe start to grow. You be the judge. You know, next time you come back, you might take another one out. See here, there's a leaf that's going bad. I'm going to take that out. Maybe in the next visit, I'll take a couple more out. In here, quite a bit going on right here. So I can afford to take some stuff out. And I'm starting to get yellows back in here as well. You can see, because there's so much going on here, we're starting to get this type of thing. And you'll get more of this when it gets crowded out in there like that. So first I'm going to get these out, and then I'm going to see what can we actually thin out in here. Lots of stuff going on here. Let's find shoots that are detracting. I think this one here, I'm gonna, and there's a lot going on in here. So instead of me heading this one back, I'm actually gonna thin it out. I'm gonna take it back as far back as I can go. So this shoot, just grab it, go all the way back, because we got too much stuff going on here. Too thick. We thin it out, we cut it all the way back to the base. Okay, let's see if we can do maybe a couple more of those. As we're going in here, so something like this on the inside here. Let's see what good this is doing. Real busy here. I think of that same thing. I'm going to take that one all the way out. You don't have a whole lot of time to decide. You got to keep moving here. This thing, same thing. It's just too much going on in here. Let's see what else we got. Keep moving through here. I'm not going to take it all out because I don't want to show the trays back there. But I'm trying to find shoots that don't have much of any leaves on it, like some of this stuff right here. These aren't really adding anything good. So I'm just going to thin those out, cut them back as far as I can. Same thing with something like this. This was headed back, but it's kind of busy in here. So let's just take that out of there. Okay, so some of this stuff is starting to show what's going on in the background here, where there's a lot of stem. I don't want to keep, you know, again, we don't want the customer seeing that, so I'm done with that part. I'm going to start looking lower down here. We want to ask, you know, do we want to take this vine out or not? If we take it out, you know, that is going to be showing. Do you want that showing or not? Okay, so if you want to keep that covered up, we want to keep this vine in here for now. But we do want to give these a chance to start growing too. So we're looking for opportunities to prune here. There may not be a whole lot of opportunities. And what I would recommend doing is, see, some of these plants in here we're going to have to take out and replace. You know, this plant right here was getting shaded out, so we do need a replacement plant. But if I start taking these vines out today, it's showing too much back there. I don't think I'm really going to do much of any pruning because it's going to be too bare if I start taking stuff out of here. If anything, I'm going to take out dead leaves and stuff that's not good. It's always, you know, that's the lowest hanging fruit. You want to take that out first. But otherwise, I'm going to leave this. See, stuff like this, again, very important that this is always taken out no matter what. These vines here, what I could do, you can see these were headed back maybe a month ago, and they're starting to send out a new shoot. But if we don't want that, because they're getting too long, we could head this back again. You know, maybe today we headed back to there. Same thing down here, you know, this is starting to hit the floor. If we don't want to hit the floor, we could cut it back, let's say maybe here for today. So you can see after we did this, the vines that we removed, and this stuff was blocking a lot of light penetration and air movement in this wall. The wall itself, honestly, does not look necessarily much better, but that's not why we did this pruning. We did this so that these plants will last longer and we don't have to replace them. If we let these vines continue to do their thing, they'll look good for a while longer, but eventually we would have to do something where we'd have to go in and prune. And at that point, you'd have to do so much pruning that the wall would just look butchered. The pruning of these, it's not a one and done deal. It's not like you come in one day and do all the necessary pruning. And that's for aesthetic reasons. If this was in a greenhouse or something, we could come in one day and prune, you know, to our heart's content and get rid of a lot of stuff, and the plants would really like it and they grow out. These are on customer sites. So we have to be pretty conservative with how much we take out, because when I walk away from this, it still needs to look really nice. And so we can only take out so much. So the next visit, we might take out a little bit more. Maybe a month from then, we might take out a little bit more, but it's the same thing. It's just these little cuts like this. By doing this, the wall still looks good, but these plants will last, hopefully, quite a few years. Close relative of the pothos is the Philodendron cordatum. And all of the things we just showed you with pruning pothos apply exactly the same to Philodendron cordatum. So same thing, each one of these is a true leaf. You can cut at any of these nodes on here. All of it applies just the same to this plant. Same exact thing applies to other vining plants, which includes Hedera, English ivy, Algerian ivy, Hedera canariensis, and also Ficus repens. So they can all be pruned just the same. And that's a pretty big deal in green walls because we do use quite a few plants like that.
That takes us to the plant of the month, which you guessed it, we'll talk about pothos in January. Pothos plant is used more than any other plant, both in interior scaping and in house plants. It's a very, very good indoor plant, a very forgiving plant that tolerates lower light. Its scientific name is Epipremnum aurum, and aurum is a Latin word for gold. And if you ever wonder where AUR comes from, the pothos plant is native to tropical islands in the Pacific Ocean, and it is a very close relative of the Philodendron cordatum and is part of that aroid family. As we mentioned earlier, it tends to grow up the trunks of trees and has a very invasive kind of creeping growth habit, and has actually spread throughout the world, and in some cases is a weed. And its growth habit is very similar to that of the common weed creeping charlie. You can see in these pictures, if you don't keep pothos pruned, they will creep all over the place and get out of control, and in many cases become quite a mess. The number one place where pothos are grown is near Orlando, Florida, in a town called Apopka, which is in central Florida. And they're also grown in Southern California in greenhouses like these. Growers will typically grow their own cuttings. Typically, they'll take them from hanging basket 8-inch plants. Vines will be cut from these parent plants, and they'll be gathered, and then they'll be cut into cuttings.
Just want to show you real quick how growers grow their own pothos cuttings. What they'll typically do is an 8-inch pothos plant like this, they'll take the vines, they'll come in and they'll cut off many vines very quickly, And with each of those vines, each one of these leaves is its own cutting, so they will come in and cut above and cut underneath. And this right here would be one cutting right here. So they would just keep doing that and very quickly just constantly taking more and more cuttings. And then these will then be stuck into the soil, and roots will start to grow from this cutting right here, and a new sprout will come out.
Once the cuttings are prepared, they'll be put in bags and they'll be taken out to the greenhouse to be stuck into soil for whatever size pot. These are 6-inch pothos being propagated directly into their soil. Here you can see cuttings right after they've been stuck into the soil. The pothos plants are typically misted early on until they develop roots. Once they develop roots, then they don't need to use the mist anymore because now they can pull up their own water and nutrients on their own. These are just pictures showing pothos starting to grow. More often than not, 8-inch pothos are actually grown in hanging baskets, and this is to help conserve space and grow more plants in the greenhouse. And that's why a lot of times when you get 8-inch pothos, they still have their hangers on the baskets. There's a number of different varieties of pothos out there. Some of the most common include golden pothos and marble pothos. And on the West Coast, we often see enjoy pothos. There's also neon pothos, which is often used because of its vibrant color. And the most commonly used plant of all that we have is jade pothos. There's also different forms of pothos, including totem pothos. Although the pothos plant is a very durable and reliable indoor plant, it does sometimes have issues. The pothos plant is tropical, so it does not tolerate cold temperatures. And these are pictures of cold damage to the pothos plant. Sometimes you may also experience issues when you're direct planting pothos into beds. Sometimes the roots will not take. So to do this, try to massage the roots a little bit so those roots have a better chance of taking. Or in some cases, people may actually leave the plant in its grow pot because it does kind of like to be root bound. It also can succumb to pythium, which is a disease often caused by overwatering. And be very careful not to overwater the pothos plant. The roots of the pothos do not like to sit in water. By far, the number one pest of pothos is mealybug. Mealybug really seem to like pothos, especially when they're grown in beds and grown in mass. So just be careful not to let your pothos get too far out of control, because if you do, then controlling mealybug can be very difficult. And finally, if you're having trouble with mealybug with pothos, you might consider using Philodendron cordatum instead, which seems not to be as susceptible to mealybug as pothos is. But that said, pothos is still a really great plant to have. That'll do it for our instructional video for January. We also have a Jeopardy game in store reviewing many of the points we've talked about over the last year. And with that, we'll see you in February. Thanks, everyone.